It was just showing people what we've got going on.
I actually love kayaking.
Well, we got another one coming up. I don't remember the exact date, but we're going to kayak over to Dead Man's Island and see what they've got going on over there.
Yeah.
But this is actually Project Green Shores number 2.
Really?
Yeah. So the first one was the one that's over there at the base of the bridge. And then this was the second one. First one was constructed in 2003. This one was constructed in 2007.
And then as far as constructed, like, are we just like making these little islands and like throwing sand out here, or?
Yeah, and they do. So what really was the major? I think there's balloons out there. The major thing they did is they did this breakwater. So all those rocks that you see, and that enhances oyster habitat. It's limestone, so it's got enough stuff for the oysters to settle on. But also it creates these little spoil islands because the sand doesn't wash out. There was a little bit of sand replenishment done here. But it's mainly a lot of natural stuff. They planted 30,000 little things of marsh grass, and you can definitely see that there's more than 30,000 little individual things of marsh grass out here. It has just completely exploded. Walk out here and you can see a lot of cool stuff. This is just a little retention pond that I don't know where it came from. This is just a freshwater little pond here. But yeah, when we just got through with winter and we have those really high and low tides, and the tide was way out one day. And we came out here to look, and we actually have oysters forming on the bottom, which is really cool because that's like what we naturally want, or oysters on the bottom. Yeah, this is my favorite little lookout area. Oh yeah, perfect. You can even see the oysters that are collecting on the rocks. So you can kind of see how there's all these little oysters. Some of them are dead. Raccoons love to come here and eat them. That's another great thing. But you kind of see the oysters have gone out. There's some in the deeper waters.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is Project Green Shores. This is a really cool thing that the Department of Environmental Protection did. City of Pensacola. I believe there were some other partners. Maybe the Nature Conservancy. Don't take me as 100% on that, but I believe
stuff about the Nature Conservancy.
I believe they were working on this as well. But this is a really cool project that I can't remember. It was like over 10 acres of oyster habitat was created. You've got these little spoil islands that are collecting all these seagrasses and really helping with the oyster restoration efforts. The more oysters and the more grasses that you have in our bays, the more filters. So that's, a big plus to this area. And they've been using this as a template for other restoration efforts around around Florida. So that's really cool. It's just a really cool little thing here. This is one of my favorite little places to come and look at.
Yeah, I'm looking at this cool bird that's out on this rock.
Yeah, a little night heron. And then you've got I don't know if that's I can't tell if that's a bluebill or a mallard duck out there, but he's just hanging out there by himself. You can see him in the middle.
Yeah.
That's another cool thing, is that we've had a lot of sea life that have come up in here. It increased, obviously, the fishing habitat as well, so a lot of people come over here and fish.
Yeah.
We've got like redfish, sheep's head, trout, and all that stuff like to hang out here. During certain times of the year, you'll see a lot of mullet. I think I just saw a guy that was launching a kayak, but a lot of people do come up here and fish and everything, and it's a really nice little area. Really cool little restoration project.
Yeah, you mentioned how the raccoons come and eat the oysters, and
yeah.
Do people come and pick up the oysters?
They're not supposed to, but people are going to be people.
Yeah.
This is actually considered a closed, prohibited harvest area, so that point that you have over there beyond the bridge, there's a point. If you take that point and run it all the way across to Butcherpin Cove, from there all the way to the west is completely closed. So there's no harvesting in those areas whatsoever. Even Big Lagoon is closed for harvest, but that is something that the state and a lot of shareholders are trying to change because it's got some really good water quality over there. And so it'd be really good for the oyster farmers, maybe even some oyster hatcheries and stuff like that to be able to, or nurseries, not hatcheries, to be able to get some oyster production going. That's the biggest thing that we have here. Biggest problem we have is that there's not a lot of oyster hatcheries in the area. So if the more that we can get, hopefully it'll increase the production of the oyster farmers here. A lot of the oyster farmers are having to go out of town. So like we're talking about Tampa over towards Louisiana just to get their oysters. And we do have one new hatchery that popped up over on Garcon Point, and they should be in production hopefully later this year.
Heck yeah.
So I was looking out there. That's what I was. See that? It's like little balloons or something. Right? If you look at the duck and then you look at the rocks right past the duck all the way to the right.
I do, yeah. Yeah, sure enough.
And you know, they just banned, well, it's on DeSantis's desk, God help us all. But it's hopefully going to get passed that balloon releases will be banned here in the state of Florida, which will be a huge win for the environment.
Yeah, do you ever think about like the fireworks that we shoot off right over the water?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of the stuff that they tell me is that a lot of that stuff is biodegradable. So I'm like, okay, well, a lot of things are biodegradable, but how long does it take to degrade?
Yeah.
You know? So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what they do. I know that's been a point of argument for a lot of people, and you know, I try to stay out of it. I'm just like, you know what, I'm not a politician or anything. Nothing that I say really kind of matters. So, but it has been something. It'll be interesting now that everybody's starting to get environmentally conscious.
Yeah.
It's really cool to see all these efforts coming up and helping save the wildlife and keep it, you know, as great as it can be. We have a great shoreline. We have a great marine system here, and so protected at all costs. Definitely, it's a moneymaker.
That's the thing too. Is like not only is it great for tourism because we want to see these beautiful waters, but we also want to be able to make money potentially with the different restaurants that are down here that sell oysters. Why get them from out of state if you can get them from our local sources?
That has been the biggest thing that I've been trying to fight, is getting these local oysters in our restaurants. It's for some reason here in this area, everybody wants a 3-inch oyster, which I kind of understand. That's what we grew up on. I mean, I remember back in the day when I was younger, I was shucking Apalachicola oysters that were the size of your hand. So I get it, but times have changed. A good 2.5 to 3-inch oyster is just as good as a 3-inch oyster that's wild. The farmers take a lot of effort into working their stuff, making sure that they have a great product. They've been working their butts off lately, and I'm very proud of them for what they've been doing. A lot of them are starting to get into restoration work, which is really cool. Talking about carbon credits and all that stuff, because it's not really 100% proven, but how much they sequester. But oysters do sequester a bunch of carbon in their shells and in their meat. So that's another
filter kind of animal. And are they like mollusks? What are oysters? Do you know?
They are.
Okay, yeah.
So they're in the bivalves. So like really closely related, obviously, to bivalve, meaning 2 shells, 2 valves. Scallops, mussels, oysters, stuff like that. They're all in the same kind of family. But oysters are definitely one of the biggest filter feeders out of that whole family. And a lot of people like to say that oysters can filter 50 gallons a day. That's in a laboratory setting. Of course, it's going to be a little bit higher. I've been saying about 30 gallons per day out in the wild. And so, for instance, we got Brandon out there with Grayson Bay. He's got close to 700,000 oysters on his farm. So, what is that? 2.1 million gallons per day.
Wow.
If I'm doing the math right. I might not be doing the math right. Maybe it's 210,000. But it's an insane amount of water that they filter. And then the more farms we have, obviously, the better the filtering possibility. There's a nice little redfish that just popped up right there. What kind of questions you got? You got anything specific?
I do, yeah. Let me actually.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll put this down so it's not in the shot. I got my butt beat yesterday with the heat. And so I was thinking it was going to be hot out here today. Now I'm like, oh, I should have brought a jacket.
Yeah, I have my jacket. The car is windy out here. That's Florida for you.
Yep. And it's supposed to be like 82 degrees on Saturday. So it's like, okay. Whew.
Keep your jackets and your shorts out, you know.
Yeah, and your rain jackets, yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. So first one, if you don't mind, if you could state your name and your current job title.
My name is Thomas Dervis II. I am the Florida Sea Grant agent for Santa Rosa County, Florida.
And you might have already touched on this, but global oyster populations have seen an 85% decline over the past 200 years. Why do you think their populations have been so significantly impacted?
A lot of it, not a lot of it, I would attribute some of it to oyster harvesting. There's times where there wasn't really much regulation in terms of oyster harvesting. A lot of it is climate change in terms of so my favorite example is Apalachicola. Everybody loves an Apalachicola oyster. That's what everybody talks about. They've been closed for 3 or 4 years now, and it's because of the water quality that has changed in the area. Oysters surprisingly don't like a hypersalinity water. They love it to be brackish, about 15 parts per thousand, all the way up to like 28, even maybe a little lower. That's their favorite range to be in. Apalachicola, so there's this thing going on with the water wars between Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. The northern states won, so they were able to keep a lot of the water. A lot of that water was flowing into the Chattahoochee, which then flew into the Apalachicola. So we've gotten a hypersaline environment in an Apalachicola, and that has kind of devastated the oyster populations. Same can be said for a lot of different places that are going through oyster declines, especially here in Pensacola. We've had a lot of fresh water, which is completely different than what Apalachicola is going through. And the fresh water really does damage the oysters. A lot of it definitely has to be with either climate change or the changing of the hydrology of the area.
That's so interesting, yeah. I had kind of read about one lady, and she was talking about how she used to go out to Perdido Bay, and she would just like be stepping out in the water, and there would just be layers of oyster underneath of her, but not so much anymore. But
yeah, and we used to have scallops here too, which is something crazy to think about. Is a lot of people go to Port St. Joe to go scalloping, but we used to have a really healthy scallop population here. Florida Sea Grant does a scallop search every year, and we found 4 scallops last year, which is, I think it was double the amount that we've ever found in combined. So hopefully that means a good thing, but we'll see this coming year when we do another scallop search.
And then scallops, like we eat them all the time, but are those like in the actual like scalloped seashells that we find on like the beach all the time?
Yep, and usually the ones that you'll find on the beach are ocean scallops. So they're not the same as the bay scallops. They're a little bit bigger. These little bay scallops are a little smaller.
Yeah, I would love to actually see those swimming in the water or something. I've never seen that.
It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Here.
Let's see. All right, so the oyster restoration project I read online was funded by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that oil spill had a direct impact on the oyster population?
That's hard to say. So when Deepwater Horizon happened, I actually wasn't living here in Pensacola. I was in Panama City. I did a lot of the cleanup efforts for the Deepwater Horizon out there. I never really noticed any oil coming in the bays, but definitely with the dispersants and stuff like that, they're still doing tests on those things, which I think is crazy that we still don't know what the dispersants have done. So it's definitely a possibility. However, it's really hard for me to say yes or no, just because I don't know if much oil came in here. So the great and worst thing about our bay is that we have a really small pass. So our pass is, in terms of how big this bay is, it's extremely small. It's over 30 days for a parcel of water to go from the Escambia River out to the pass, which controls a lot of things. So like our harmful algal blooms, like red tide, we usually don't see that in our bays just because it's not easy enough for the Gulf water to come rushing in. So that has protected us, and however, that also could have protected this area from the oil. But like I said, the dispersants, we have no idea what they've done,
And this is definitely not on my questionnaire list, but I'm just interested now because I'd seen that some people have taken these like clumps of dirt, like rich soil content, and like dropping it in the ocean to try to create like good algae blooms or something. I mean, it's like, what is the difference, I guess, like what makes it like a toxic algae bloom versus just like a normal one?
It's just the species. So Carania brevis is the red tide flagellate, dinoflagellate, and it will produce a toxic chemical that not only gets released into the water, but it also gets released into the air. We do have helpful algae out there. I'm drawing a blank on the names, but they do help the environment. So algae is actually a really cool organism that a lot of people don't realize produces most of the oxygen for the earth. Algae produces a heavy amount of oxygen even compared to the trees that we have. So having algae out in the water isn't a bad thing always, but having it controlled is always better. There's this thing called eutrophication, which you've probably heard of. It's a big word, big fancy word, just meaning that the water is really cloudy and the light can't penetrate through that. Doesn't seem like it's a big issue, but when you think about eutrophication happening around seagrass beds and stuff like that, it will block seagrasses from being able to consume sunlight to be able to do photosynthesis. So that's another big thing that we're working with. And algae plays a part in the eutrophication process. So.
Yeah. Seagrass, yeah, is such an important part, I guess, of like the water ecosystem that I didn't even think about or like take for granted. And I saw that was one of the first like kind of projects that you did way back when. Was maybe whenever you were a kid or something, you were kind of locally rallying your neighbors for the seagrass.
Yeah, we had people that were trying to dredge our canal in the back of my house, and there was a person out there telling the people that we had dead seagrass, no seagrasses, but it was a beautiful seagrass bed that was full of life. I mean, we had trout, redfish, almost everything you can think of in that little area. And luckily enough, it never got passed, and to this day, it's still protected, and I'm really proud of that area still being protected, 30 years later, 25 years later, so.
That's awesome. We'd love to see that we can actually make an impact, if we speak up.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know any of like the challenges of like this oyster restoration project, or like anything kind of issues that you kind of came across?
Money is the biggest issue. A lot of people see sea grant stuff like that and think that we have the ability to give out grants. In fact, the word sea grant just means that we're funded from a land grant university. So it's University of Florida, in cooperation with FAMU, Florida Agricultural Mechanical University over in Tallahassee. That was a hard one. But we work with them, and the hardest thing that we found is getting the money and the funds for it. Everybody's obviously fighting for funds every year for things. And something on this kind of scale is massive. Like I said recently, that the estuary program has an $11 million grant to do oyster restoration, and that really is kind of just a drop in the bucket for what we could do with this area and to bring this area back to its former glory.
I agree. And what are some of the accomplishments that you guys have seen from these kind of projects?
Well, this is just looking at this. This is a great accomplishment. There used to be no little spoil islands here. It used to be nothing but water. Now you've got a great little breakwater that's being filled with oysters. You've got these little islands here that can, shorebirds can nest on and hang out on. You've got an increase in wildlife in the area, a lot of fish and stuff like that, biodiversity. We've actually got a study going on right now through Dolphin Island Sea Lab, doing a study on the recruitment of juvenile and adult fish in this area. So hopefully that's a good result. I think it's going to be a great result. Cleaner waters have been a thing. I can't say that it's directly attributed to everything that we've been doing here, but this past year we've had some really clean waters. We haven't had a lot of health advisories, which is a great thing. Hopefully a lot of people are starting to become more aware, but I would also like to attribute it to the oysters because they're great filter feeders and they're great powerhouses for storing a bunch of stuff that we don't want in our waters. But in terms of successes, I mean, this is one of the biggest successes for me, just seeing this. I know this isn't just oyster reefs, but it's a whole environment that we've kind of created to help enhance the wildlife in the area.
I think I just saw another fish, just swimming in the water there.
Yeah. It looked like he was chasing something. Yeah, like I said, you can sit here all day and you'll see stuff that you would never see.
And let's see, how do you know if the oysters are healthy? Does that matter? Are they still helping the environment even if we can't eat them?
Yes. It's just mainly because if I'm saying you can't harvest it, it's just because it's in a closed area. What that means is that there's usually some kind of pollutants, or it's around a place of a lot of residential access. a lot of residential areas, just because of runoff. Runoff is one of the biggest issues we have, especially here in Florida. We're now one of the wettest areas in the United States of America, even compared to Seattle. So a lot of that water, you have a lot of runoff. With the runoff, you could have, chemicals, you could have fertilizers, you could have feces, for that matter, animal feces, which is something they try to control. So the Department of Agriculture will come out and test the waters. They'll test it, weekly or bi-weekly, and they're testing for a bacteria that could be indicated that the presence of feces is in the water. It does not mean that there is feces in the water. It just means that it could possibly be in the water. And so even the reason why these are closed is because they haven't gotten a lot of testing done. They haven't done a lot of monitoring. Like for the Big Lagoon, there wasn't 5 years worth of data for them to look at. So now that they've been doing it for, I think they're on year 4, after year 5, they should be able to say, yes, it's good to go, or no, it's bad to go. Recently, the water the boundary up in East Bay was changed. So it excluded a portion of the northern part of the East Bay. And that actually created a better environment for the farmers. They've actually been open a lot more. They actually just got closed because of this rain we had. But before that, they had not been closed since June or July of last year. So that was incredible. Usually when I was an oyster farmer back in the day, we were closed almost half the year. So.
Wow. And that's just because of having to be shut down for the water testing?
The water testing, it was always testing positive in that area for the coliform bacteria. And once they excluded that area and said it was prohibited, they're getting clean tests from the farms. And now they're even testing on the oyster farms, which is great.
Nice.
So.
Let's see.
But let me answer that question a little bit more. Sorry, I just remembered what the question was. No matter if they're in a prohibited zone or not, they're going to filter just as much. And to be able to tell if it's a healthy oyster or not, it's really hard to do that. I've been on an oyster farm where we lost 100% of our oysters, but they still looked beautiful and pretty. However, there was some kind of environmental condition that just kicked them. But definitely, it doesn't matter if they're in an open or closed area, they're still going to filter a lot of water.
And then, how did you get into oyster farming?
So my true love was actually finfish. I went to Auburn University and did my master's in aquaculture. My research was on Florida pompano reproduction. And so I was at Claude Petit Mariculture Center, which is over in Gulf Shores, and I was doing research on Florida pompano. One of my colleagues at the time was going through a couple of oyster farming classes, and she was like, hey, you might be interested in this. So I got invited to one of the oyster farming classes, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is kind of cool. Was offered a job with Pensacola Bay Oyster Company, being their farm manager. That was I was hoping just to bridge the gap between me and my career that I was hoping to choose. However, I fell in love with it. I was out on the farm almost every day. I wasn't really the biggest oyster fan. I used to eat them when I was younger. But once I started growing them and everything, I just fell in love with the oysters, how they do everything, filtering the bays, filtering everything, sequestering carbon. They're just incredible organisms. I used to call them rocks with meat in them. Now I have a different look at them as a great little environmental buddy that also tastes really good and is really beneficial for a lot of people.
Definitely an underrated meat rock.
Yes.
That was going to be one of my questions, is if you like to eat oysters, and if so, what's your favorite way?
So yeah, I like to eat oysters. I'm not a raw. I will eat raws. So I just got back from the Oyster South Symposium, which was in New Orleans. It was a great event. There was a shuck and tell where they had a bunch of oyster farmers from around the area. And so I consumed almost every oyster from every area raw. It was great. However, if you're going to look at me and say, how would you like your oysters? Put them on the grill, give me some Cajun butter, or give me some black garlic compound butter. I don't even need a cracker at that point. I can just throw it on the grill and then slurp it right out of the shell. So
I'll be craving oysters after this. Do you have any advice for UWF students currently going through the marine biology program and maybe finding work afterwards?
Yes, I have a lot of advice. Stay with it. Don't get too discouraged about things. The job market can be difficult. One of the things that I tell people, I have actually a couple family members that went through marine biology school, and they had the same problem I did. When I got out of my master's program, I applied to over 100 jobs. I had over 90 letters of, sorry, you're not, chosen for this job. I didn't let that deter me. I kept going. I found a great position at Alabama. And my life turned around when I got the job offer for Pensacola Bay. Definitely just keep your nose down, keep grinding, keep doing what you can. The greatest thing, though, is that it seems like nowadays there's a lot more emphasis on the waterways and marine biology and stuff like that, whereas back in the day it was kind of, oh, it's just the Gulf of Mexico, just let it be, it'll fix itself. I've noticed a lot of good positions popping up. Don't be afraid to do something that's out of your comfort zone. That's what I did with the oysters. I wasn't really into oysters at the beginning. I loved finfish. I mean, I did everything from pompano, trout, redfish, snook. But when I went and did the oysters, I fell in love with it, which is something that you wouldn't be able to do if you said, oh, I don't want to work with, let's say, salmon or something like that. I even applied to a job up in Alaska. I was like, shoot, I'll just go to Alaska and work with salmon. So just, keep it going. It's a great field to be in. It can be very rewarding, but it can also be very stressful at the same time. The waters don't listen to us. Mother Nature does not listen to what we do. It does not care if we're going out sampling at 4 o'clock in the morning and it's blowing 50 miles an hour. She does not care. She's not going to give up anything. So, keep your will with you, keep going, and just keep with it. That's my biggest thing, is that, don't get too discouraged. Just keep going.
I think that's great advice, especially as someone who's always applying for jobs myself, not even within the marine biology. But yeah, if it takes 100 to get that one, do the 100.
It could be that one that changed your life, like happened to me. So.
And that was pretty much all my questions, unless you want to add anything that you particularly think you want to get out there.
No, I mean, just support your local farmers, support your local oyster industry people. If you really want to see local oysters on menus around here, just ask them, hey, why don't you have a local oyster on your menu? We actually have a local restaurant here that's the reason why they have local oysters on the menus, because they had so much demand from the customers. So just, if that's something that you want to see on your menus, keep it up. And definitely just support your oyster farmers and support this beautiful habitat that we have here.
Can you spill the beans? Where can we eat to get the local oysters?
So Atlas actually has some local oysters. Harry Roy is a private club. If you're lucky enough to get in there, they have local oysters as well. Grand Marlin has local oysters, and we're actually I'm not. I'm helping promote them, but a couple oyster farmers have gotten contacts from a couple restaurants locally, and they're trying to work out the logistics to get in there. Salty Pearl is one of them. And I'm drawing a blank on the other one. Pearl and Horn doesn't have a local oyster per se, but they do have murder points, which are from Alabama, which are pretty close. But yeah, if you go to any restaurant and you see oysters and they don't have local, and say, hey, let's get some local oysters in here.
Heard that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is fun.